In our quest to keep you at the top of your game, today Procurious is hosting a discussion on the very latest hot skill, supplier marketing. And we're being hosted by our favourite thought leaders, HICX, who brought us our favourite term of 2021, supplier experience. So why supplier marketing? Why now? I don't need to tell anyone in this audience about the challenges of short supply at the moment or the dramatic strains inflation has put on our cost base. We're in a stage of the business cycle where the suppliers have all the power, which is traditionally unusual territory for Procurement Pro, but becoming increasingly frequent, unfortunately. Right now, we need to be schmoozing the suppliers rather than the other way around. We need to be thinking about how we position our companies as a customer of choice. And if not, we face the dire consequences of paying above the odds, or even worse, not even getting the opportunity to pay because we're being cut off supply. But don't worry, the last few years have proven that you know how to change. You know how to adapt your approach when conditions change, and you know how to upskill. So how do we do it? How do we market ourselves to our suppliers? That's the question we need to answer today. Don't fear, we've assembled two leading experts here today, and within the next hour, you will have enough information to get you started on thinking about a supplier marketing campaign. As our host for today, and as we're talking all things marketing, I thought it only appropriate to invite Anthony Payne, the Chief Marketing Officer of HICX. Anthony, before we get started, do you mind telling us a bit about yourself and HICX?
Sure. Well, hi, Tania, and thanks for having us. Great to be here. So from my perspective, I work in the marketing team at HICX. I've been in B2B software marketing for about 25 years. And under normal circumstances, I probably wouldn't bore a procurement and supply chain practitioner audience with the kind of my marketing history. But actually, I think today, as we'll see, it's actually a little bit more relevant than it would be usually. So I've spent some time in very large blue chip brands such as General Electric and BlackBerry. And most recently in venture-backed scaling businesses such as HICX. And talking about HICX specifically, so HICX is the supplier experience platform. And the way to think of it, I guess, is customers use us as the interlink or the platform that sits between them and their suppliers. And that can be for a range of processes. It might be for something as discrete as managing reporting on carbon emissions. But a lot of our customers use us to onboard as the onboarding platform for all of their suppliers, 100%, indirect, direct, strategic, non-strategic. Many of our customers use us as the single source of truth for data. So all of the supplier data in a single platform serving all the other applications across the business. But what these things all have in common is we exist as this platform between the buying organization, the customer, and their suppliers. And so the sort of topic of supplier experience is, as you say, very close to our hearts.
Well, thank you, Anthony. Hey, I think you might find that they put you more in the front row now rather than the backroom marketing, because that certainly sounded like a great elevator pitch to me and perfect background for talking about marketing today. So thanks. Now, I thought to bolster our thought leadership power on this topic, we needed someone to join us, and who we found is someone who's worked in over 150 of the world's most successful marketing organizations. He's advised on more than 250 brands and almost 500 different products. So I thought this gentleman will provide the perfect insight on supplier marketing. So Nathan Hodges, welcome to the show. And do you mind sharing with our audience today a bit about your background, your current role, and what you're doing?
Sure. Well, given an introduction like that, I almost wonder if I've got time even to be on a webinar like this. I don't see quite
how. It's so important.
Obviously. Just a slight correction. I haven't worked in 150 marketing organizations. I've trodden the corridors of 150 different marketing organizations trying to help them solve exactly the kind of problems that we're here to try and talk to today. So I'm managing director for a marketing management consultancy called Trinity P3. And I suppose if I'm to try and work out why it is that I'm joining this webinar today, and let's see if I can justify this subsequently as well, is because Trinity P3 works at the interface of marketers and marketing organizations and procurement in any number of very large to medium-sized organizations. So perhaps what we can do today, given I've had 12 years of doing that, and we've done that across Australia, New Zealand, and then Southeast Asia, Europe, the UK, and America for all that time, perhaps what I can bring you is not just the perspective on where procurement is as a discipline at the moment as far as the market is concerned, but also how marketers are regarding procurement and what they would do were they in your shoes trying to move the business on. So very excited to talk about the whole concept here today of supplier marketing. It sounds a step on from where things are at the moment, and I think it's an exciting avenue to go down. But let's see what I can add to the conversation today, Tania.
Well, we do too. We think these terms are really exciting. You know, HICX first came up with supplier experience and now supplier marketing. And as I said, we want to keep our community ahead of the latest trends and ideas. So this could be all new ground that we're breaking here today. So thanks for joining us, Nathan. Now, over to you, Anthony. I last saw you at the Procurement Leaders Conference in London last summer. What have you been doing since then?
Well, I guess from a work perspective, I've spent a lot of my time, as much of my time as I can, talking about and helping to promote the idea of supplier experience. You've mentioned it a few times, but we really think over the last 18 months or so, this term is starting to resonate. People are starting to appreciate the change in relationship, and we'll talk a lot more about this, between organizations and their suppliers, and that it isn't a sort of single one-way power dynamic anymore. And so I've had a great opportunity to speak to some amazing brands, companies like Mars, Heineken, Unilever, Mondelez, Lenovo, all of whom have in common they've invested really heavily in this area in the last couple of years. So yeah, as much as possible, I'm out speaking to companies like that and talking the talk about supplier experience. And at weekends, I drive Dad's taxi.
Yeah, well, great. Well, you know, we're looking forward to hearing all those stories today. And Nathan, you mentioned you've really got a unique role. You're the interface between marketing and procurement. How are you actually building a bridge between those two functions at the moment? This is just before we get into our conversation.
Yeah, it's a particular perspective we get, which is very useful. Maybe it's worth me just spending a moment sharing this. I suppose if we were to look at our marketing contacts and colleagues and clients, the biggest thing in marketing is what you need to remember is that not everything you can measure is actually the thing that is most important. It's not always possible to measure the things that are the most important in marketing, much as marketers would like to do that. But of course, for procurement, it's really important to measure as much as you possibly can. So with those two worlds and those two perspectives and those two views on how business should be traveling, our job is to create a framework where a definition of what value looks like and can be discussed and can be pursued. That's the central challenge. And that's why it's so fascinating. If procurement is then to think about some of the techniques that are over in that marketing world and apply it to what procurement's about, then there's a whole discussion to be had about measurement, about what is actually important that is not amenable to measurement all the time, and where value sits. And of course, I'm not excusing any of my marketing clients here, because there's a lot of our time we spend saying to right brain marketing teams and marketing organizations, for goodness sake, there is so much rigor and definition and structure and process that can be brought into the operation here by just bringing the procurement disciplines to bear upon what you do. So it's a dichotomy for us all the time. It's a challenge, and it's where we sit, and it keeps us busy.
Well, you've just raised a great idea. Maybe we need to do a webinar for marketing about learning about procurement. So maybe we should do the flip side to this at another stage. But look, let's get stuck into the conversation, and we'll start with the definition. But I guess, you know, I'd like to kick off by saying there's a lot of rapid change, as we know, taking place in procurement at the moment. And we've already seen a growing focus in areas such as supplier relationship management and, yes, supplier experience to a certain degree. And now one of the most exciting areas to emerge potentially is the title of today's webinar, Supplier Marketing. So let's start with the definition, Anthony. What do we actually mean by supplier marketing?
Yeah, no, it's I'm really excited about the topic, not just because I'm a marketer, but I think the impact could be huge. And I think we're going to be talking more about what's driving it. So as you ask, I'm going to stick tightly to a definition. And in the best way to come up with the definition, I think, is frankly to shamelessly steal something and modify it for our purposes. And so anyone that's done any marketing study will be familiar with a gentleman called Philip Kotler. He's kind of the most respected, I guess, academic in the world of marketing. And he defines marketing as, and I'm going to read this out because it's short, but I want to be very specific. He defines marketing as the process by which companies engage customers, build strong customer relationships, and create customer value in order to capture value from customers in return. Now, I think if we want a definition of supply marketing, we have a really easy job. We just literally swap the word customer for supplier, and you get the following. The process by which companies engage suppliers, build strong supplier relationships, and create supplier value in order to capture value from suppliers in return. So I love it. I think this sums it up perfectly. And the idea is that the procurement function can take an awful lot of learning from their counterparts across the hall in marketing, best practices, techniques, and the deployment of technology. And as they're thinking about how they engage with the suppliers, they can learn from how their marketing colleagues engage with customers. So as a definition, I think it's a great start.
Oh, absolutely. And, you remind me that, one of our best procurement thought leaders around the globe is Kearney's Eloise Epstein. And she recently commented that as we think about supplier experience, and certainly from an enterprise point of view, the greatest risks to our organisations come through third parties, your suppliers. And on the flip side, the greatest opportunities come through your suppliers. So we really have to get better at engaging with suppliers. And, that's what we're talking about today. So, Nathan, what are your top tips on how procurement can improve supplier experience?
Well, I suppose if I were to draw on what we've observed and what we deal with every day, there's a central top tip from which many other things flow. But it's as simple as this. It's about putting that customer lens, that supplier lens, whatever the language is that we're going to use, on you as a buyer, as a buying team, as a procurement team. So that's not just around using some of the tech tools that we have and the ways that marketers can reach their audiences in order to improve that side of things, but it's actually looking at what are the actual emotional and heuristic and behavioral things that we can go and tackle by putting that customer lens on and improve our position as a buyer. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about some of those things that actually drive human behavior and are not necessarily expressed. So, for instance, the desire or the unconscious or unexpressed desire for a supplier to feel respected, or to feel understood, or to feel like working with this particular buying team or this particular procurement team could be more fun than working with the others. Or it could be that it's easier, it's simpler, there's fewer forms, there's less process, there's a more welcoming endpoint to it. Or it could even be something as simple as this is the buying team or this is the procurement team that did something that was unexpected, that maybe made me as a supplier think that they were marking themselves out or moving the market on in some way, or were looking to concerns that supplier might have about the way the market or the world is that are not acknowledged by others. So all of these things, if I put a marketing hat on and sit in a procurement chair, these are the kinds of things that you'd look at. These are the kinds of nudges that get consumers over the line. And you don't have to be better, and you don't have to be unique. You just have to be slightly distinctive and different is the trick.
And slightly human, dare we say it. I mean, a lot of these traits you're saying are like what we want in human relationships: trust, respect, I'm listened to, my partner surprises me. I love that one. These are basic relationship skills that aren't that common.
Who knew? Business is full of human beings. Who knew that? Huh? B2B and B2C. It's full of humans, and it's all pretty unpredictable and pretty irrational and justified by rational reasons after the emotional decision has been made. So, of course, when you're thinking about your own life, of course, that's the way it goes. So that's the kind of areas that I'd be digging. The biggest tip in terms of, putting a marketing hat on and sat in a procurement chair.
Yeah, I love it. I love it, Nathan. Thank you for getting down to those very important relationship issues straight away. Anthony, though, we'll swing back to you, back to our definitions. So we've talked about a supplier experience a bit just there. What should we be thinking, or why should we be thinking about supply marketing right now? What are some of the sort of contextual issues that are going on in the landscape that, is really precipitating this need to think about supply marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Nathan's spot on, by the way. I was nodding furiously throughout. But if we think about if I think about why now, or why this, let's say, why supply marketing now? And I think, and Nathan just touched on this a little bit, I think, or inferred it. There's one key factor at the centre, which is your suppliers have agency. And I don't want to confuse terms by thinking about agencies in the marketing sense. They have agency, by which I mean they are in a position to make decisions which will affect you as a customer. And you have some influence over those decisions, but you cannot dictate how the supplier behaves. You cannot dictate their response to or the decisions they're going to take. And that, I think, is at the core of it. Because if we think about what marketing is, marketing can't dictate. I can't go into, approach a consumer and say, you must buy this shampoo. I have to influence you to buy that shampoo. And that's the shift. It's a subtle shift, but I think it's really important. Now we can debate the extent to which it's been true. Have companies ever been able to fully dictate to their suppliers? Well, probably not. But I think in most sectors, most people will acknowledge that there has been this shift, this power dynamic, and it's heading towards the supplier gaining more power in the relationship and not in the other direction. I think it's worth sort of keeping in mind, because we are, there's a danger that us marketers will go off fully into the sort of world of fluffy and non-specific, and we need to keep it real. And companies obviously do have the nuclear option. They do get to say, if you don't do X, whether that's, deliver by a certain date or provide certain information or offer a discount, then you will no longer be a supplier. But I just question how often in reality that threat is that effective. Are you really going to cancel a supplier, even, a non-core supplier, just because they haven't submitted a response to your last survey? Who owns the relationship within the organization? Who is actually in a position to make that decision? And can they really enforce that threat of termination to a supplier? Yes, sometimes, absolutely. But I don't think it's that often. So I think why is this going on? I think it's this shift and this dynamic. I think if we think about what's happening now, I think there's a number of factors, as with all of these things, and things are coming together at the same time. So one is the general trend of digitization. There's more technology now being brought to bear in the back office and procurement, supply chain related functions. And this is changing behavior. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about what's happening there. So digitization itself is driving this idea of supply marketing. Something we've talked about in the procurement sector for a long time, which is what's the role of procurement, looking forward? How can procurement become more and more strategic? And I view supplier marketing as a terrific enabler of that. And again, I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about that, but that's driving this supplier marketing adoption. There's a massive increase in the amount of information and data that companies need to get from their suppliers. That's just reality. The different legislation, compliance with different elements, wanting to present themselves as being sustainable and eco-friendly, what have you. All of that requires customers to obtain information and data from their suppliers. And that, again, I think is a key driver for supplier marketing. And then real quick, just two more. The impact of all that data requirement is potentially negative. In other words, I'm going to have a real potential source of inefficiency and cost if I've got to spend, as a buying organization, going to spend hours, days, weeks gathering all this information. And supply marketing, I think, can be a key for how we do this more efficiently. And then the final point real quick is, and Nathan alluded to this already, is our continued desire and need to be customer of choice. So how can we be, to Nathan's point, how can we be presenting a friendly face, a friction-free experience? How can we just make it easier for us to do, for suppliers to do business with us in order to get this status of customer of choice? So, why? Because of the power shift, and why now? Because I think there's a series of trends that are going on that are really bringing us all together, which is making it really exciting.
Nathan, do you have anything to add to that, or are you seeing that as well?
Look, I'm entirely on side with that analysis. I mean, listening to Anthony there, it's almost a surprise that this hasn't come up before. And it's a surprise that this hasn't been a hell of a lot more urgent than it even feels now. And particularly for us as a management consultancy, we're constantly dealing with procurement teams, of course. So that's the third part of it for us. And my goodness me, yes, the amount of information we need to supply, the detail into which we go, the regulatory hoops that we need to jump through, it's all there. I suppose I'm going to pick up on one thing and try and build on that Anthony mentioned there. So again, putting that marketing hat on to sit in a procurement chair. The trick here, if we're on the positive side to try and incentivize suppliers to deal with us here, the objective here of all of this, if it's to succeed, will not necessarily be around being different or unique in the way that the buyer goes to the market to try and attack suppliers, or it'll be around being just distinctive. So if you are competing for the very best suppliers to go the wrong race with you and get to the end and give you the best possible result, what you'll need to do is be distinctive in your appeal. You don't necessarily need to be different, but there needs to be something about you, that grit in the oyster, something about the way that you act, the way that you are, the way that you speak, the way that you deal with your suppliers, that gets under the skin, that removes one of those unconscious biases, that helps, shortcut an existing heuristic, whatever it happens to be. And I hear Anthony say at the beginning of what he said that it's important not to be too fluffy here, and I don't want to sound too fluffy, but I'll take the marketing hat off if you want and be less fluffy. But there's a distinct lack of fluff in a lot of the procurement supplier buyer discussions.
Yeah.
And we're not necessarily talking about fluff being introduced. We're talking about a level of empathy and a customer lens being introduced into the conversation. So it sounds softer than what's been there before, but actually Anthony makes the case that it really is high time.
No, I mean, I love the comments you're making. I don't think they're fluffy at all. I think these are the deal makers and the deal breakers, if we're honest with ourselves. And I love that point of making sure that you're distinctive, the grit in the oyster, and, those important relationship tips earlier. I do think these are the things that make a relationship and are the spark that marketing is all about. And when we're talking about supply marketing, this is what our procurement pros need to be thinking. So, Anthony, you mentioned quite a few trends that you're seeing in the business landscape. Digitalization was one of this. So, talk to me about digitalization.
Sure. So, nobody listening to this discussion will be surprised to hear that there's been an explosion in technology in this sector, right? It's perhaps long overdue, but regardless, and Eloise, you mentioned, it talks about it extensively, but there's so much tech being deployed in procurement and supply chain now. And companies are trying to digitize and automate big swathes of the back office. Now, sometimes that's in a careful and considered way, and sometimes a little bit less so. And it's a little bit like kids in a sweet shop or sailors on shore leave going mental and buying all the software they can find. You have to think about what that means from the supplier's perspective, because an awful lot of those software applications have a role for the supplier to play. They have to log in, they have to take part, share information, receive information, interact, transact, whatever it may be. So while the buying side of the relationship, the customer side is looking to streamline and simplify, actually what's happening on the other side of it is often the opposite. You're actually adding more complexity and almost certainly more cost. And of course, any individual supplier is highly likely to have multiple customers. If they're all doing the same thing, you have this multiplication effect. So what is ostensibly there to simplify and streamline is actually having the opposite effect, potentially from a supplier perspective. And the supplier marketing, the reason I consider this a key driver for supplier marketing is because this is also an issue in the customer-facing world, in the sort of traditional marketing-facing world. We've had an explosion of tech. It's happened sooner and more aggressively over the last 20 years as consumers, both on the B2C side, but also as buying individuals within a B2B environment. We're faced with tons of technology. If you rent an apartment, you go to a portal and you interact with a bunch of stuff. If you buy anything online, if you're in a B2B set, there's tons of tech involved. And it could be overwhelming and it could be an absolute nightmare. But because we as the customer have one simple option for us always, which is we can just walk away. right? In almost all these situations, I can just say, stop it. This is just too hard. I don't like the tech. It's too confusing. I'm off. I'm taking my money elsewhere. As a consequence of that, the marketers behind all that technology, behind all these great experiences, have to think very carefully and very deeply about what the customer experience is, what the end-to-end journey is going to be. And that's then reflected in the quality of the software, but also the quality of the process and the end-to-end experience. And that's the key. So, it's a slightly involved point, but very simply, if you're going to buy all this tech, you're going to throw it at your suppliers, and you're just going to assume that because they're suppliers, they have to suck it up and adopt it. Think again. Go over to the customer side, think of their playbook, which is how do I use software intelligently within a process that delivers an end-to-end experience, which is pleasing and will make me want to engage with you, make me want to, adopt a piece of technology. So that's why when I say digitization in and of itself is driving frankly, the requirement, in my view, for supplier marketing to become commonplace. Hopefully that makes sense.
And even if it's as simple as the effort that we put into helping our suppliers on board, that experience and, spelling out the why and making it as seamless as possible, that's a huge fracture in the relationship often is these, portals and technology that they're using. What about the strategic role of procurement? You talked about that, as one of the other things that are happening in the landscape.
Yeah. So again, not as I said, it's not new to this audience, and it's been well understood, I think, now for a while that procurement, in order for it to continue to be relevant, needs to be more than just about delivering cost savings. But I think that same statement can be expressed much more positively, which is organizations need procurement to be about so much more than delivering cost savings, and there's just a huge opportunity to add strategic value. And this has been said in this industry for a little while now. But the reason I think this is relevant here is because at the core of that value is the unique position that procurement professionals sit in within their organization as that conduit to or that enabler of the supplier ecosystem. And so again, I view this as a reason why supplier marketing should be viewed as a way to maximize that value of those relationships. And I think a really tangible example of that is and we've alluded to it a few times, is the need to gather an awful lot of information from suppliers, right? We've got all this legislation, we've got requirements around quality, around performance. And what that represents is I'm the buying organization. For whatever reason, I need stuff from you, not the product, not the transaction, but I need information and data from you, and you, the supplier, own it. So what can I do about it? And actually, I was speaking to an organization a few weeks ago who have many thousands of suppliers, but for 200 of them, there are three, they call them initiatives, which essentially is requirements for information, whether it's a form fill or a compliance certificate, what have you. And these need to be maintained on a continuous basis. And they can see that today, and they have this requirement, and it's being managed via Excel and email. But what they've done is they've looked forward and they recognize that the number of suppliers with whom they're going to have to work in this way, in other words, the number of suppliers from whom they're going to need information, is going to increase significantly up into the sort of 1,000 or 2,000. And the increase in initiatives, the types of information they're going to need to collect, is also going to increase very significantly. And what that means in real tangible terms, non-fluffy terms, is today they have 2 people managing that process. If they don't automate, if they don't digitize, and they just carry on as they are, they will need to hire 30 people into that team just to manage collecting data from their organization. So bringing this back to the strategic role of procurement, if that, because the different teams across the business, there are many different teams across the business that need that information, not procurement. Procurement isn't usually asking for quality or risk or compliance related information, but they can play this pivotal role. So bringing that all together, what this means is procurement has a huge opportunity to be more strategic by facilitating this essential function of business, and by doing so in a way that doesn't require the hiring of 28 new people or a 20x increase in staff, by using the principles of supplier marketing. And I think we can talk a little bit more about how that works in a while, but hopefully that as a driver makes sense.
What's your view, Nathan? Is procurement becoming more strategic? Are we drowning our suppliers in paperwork till they go cross-eyed? What are you thinking about?
Well, I wish it was paperwork, because there's a limit to that, but it's not. It's digitized information being supplied. I was nodding furiously at what Anthony was saying, particularly when he talked about digitalization. I mean, we've got a client at the moment that is embarking on an enormous project to get their customer base to be self-serving so that they can reduce costs from the business. And what we've said to them straight away is look, if it works for the tech vendor and it works for you as an organization, but it doesn't work for your customers, then it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. There has to be a different solution. And what I'm loving here is that Anthony's idea around supplier marketing is the lens that gets put into that conversation that makes sure actually that's a three-way improvement, not just a two-way improvement. So this is what's so terribly important to add to this whole thing. I mean, if you're going to ask, and I'm a managing director who gets pursued vehemently around the internet probably 3 or 4 times a week to update my details, my company details on suppliers with whom I've not, with companies and organizations and buyers with whom I've not had a relationship for 2-3 years because we work on a project basis. So it's just a pointless use of my time. What you've done, I mean, as a consumer, I then say what you've done as an organization is outsource all of your information gathering to me, the small business person or the medium-sized business person. Now, it's not conducive to a close, harmonious, mutually profitable relationship for the next 3 to 5 years. So I'm just listening to what Anthony said and going, yes, actually, the time is right and the conditions are absolutely ripe for a lens to be placed in here that actually represents what the end suppliers are after and how you can improve that relationship. So it's music to my ears, in other words, Tania, is what I'm saying.
Oh, well, great. We're in violent agreement here. Well, let's move the conversation on and talk about how we put supplier marketing into practice. Anthony, talk to me in practical terms. What does this mean?
I can't talk practical on marketing. No. Yeah, let's do something useful. Yeah. So I referred to Philip Kotler earlier, and I'm sure the first page of his textbook on marketing is segmentation. And so I think absolutely the same thing has to apply here. So what do we mean by that? So from a marketing perspective, segmentation, in the way I view it simply is understanding your audience. Who is it you're trying to reach? And what are the characteristics of a group within the total audience that are relevant when you want to engage with them? So that's kind of theoretical. What does that mean in reality? Well, I'm sitting here in Wiltshire in the UK. And it means that I don't get adverts for a new bakery opening in Santa Barbara or a new ice cream shop in Sydney because I'm not part of that segment. And at my age, I'm not getting targeted with, new baby related sort of paraphernalia. It wouldn't make any sense. From a B2B perspective, it means if I'm running a conference on, e-commerce platforms, so targeted at retailers, then there is no point in the conference organizer trying to attract people who work in banks. They have no interest, right? So it's really simple. There's nothing intellectually challenging about this. It's just who you're trying to get to, what are the characteristics that are relevant for them, and then deploy all of your engagement or whatever tactics you want to use to that group or that segment. And I think exactly the same principle needs to apply to suppliers. And we've touched on this a few times now already, which is this requirement to get information. But very simply, you don't need the same information from all of your suppliers all over the world. We use, an example, one of our customers is in the energy sector and they buy uranium because they're a nuclear provider. So the information they need from the people who supply uranium is not the same as they need from people who provide cleaning services to their offices, right? There is a different level. So if you go out and you don't segment and you ask all of your suppliers the same questions, you are doing exactly what Nathan just said. I think you hit the nail on the head. You are outsourcing the problem to your suppliers. Now, traditionally as customers, maybe we've said, stuff it, I don't care. I'm the customer, they're the supplier. If they want my business, they can I'm frankly willing to outsource this problem to them. But there are a number of problems with this, and we've touched on them already a little bit in terms of how the supplier then reacts to you, how much they want to do business with you, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're thinking about what can I do about it, we'll start with segmentation. Now, I don't think this is actually new to many of the procurement professionals who will be listening to this. They're doing it already. You're not that crazy is to send the uranium questions, once a year to the forest or whatever, or the clean spot. But you probably have to do it very manually. You're probably using Excel. You're probably using email. And as a consequence, you're not doing that segmentation to anywhere near the level or extent to which you ought to be. And as a consequence, the suppliers are getting more requests, are getting more initiatives that they need to deal with. And I will just add one quick point before I stop on this one is it's easy to assume, well, it's not that bad, is it? I mean, the cleaning services people obviously know they don't need to fill in the uranium-related compliance questionnaire. Well, fine, in that one, maybe they obviously don't. But a lot of the time, they'll get these requests and they don't know whether they should or not. So they have to investigate. There'll be some acronym they've never heard of. They spend 20 minutes on Google looking at what the hell's this. Then they're trying to figure out whether it is relevant. And at the end of it, they'll decide, actually, it isn't. But it's too late. The time's wasted. The pain is gone. And you're my customer. So, of course, I instinctively want to help and I feel I ought to. So it's a filtering exercise. Filter what it is your suppliers need, what you need from your suppliers, and do that via segmentation. And there's tech and tooling, and this isn't going to be a tech session talking about it, but there is very readily available and honestly fairly straightforward technology out there to enable you to do this at scale, extremely efficiently and give your suppliers a much, much better experience. And that to me is all part of supplier marketing.
Nathan, filtering, segmentation, a lot of this sounds like what you're used to on the marketing side. So what, in your view, can procurement learn from these general marketing principles?
Look, I think I'm not going to be able to add usefully to what Anthony said, because what he said is absolutely right. And those things are there. And it's going to be really important to get really smart and to get used to handling those things. So I suppose what I'd add is this other element that marketing as a discipline, when it's working, constantly does. I think is it William Goldman was the Hollywood writer? I think it's him. Someone will correct me if not, who said nobody actually knows anything. A very, very successful Hollywood writer, but he and then said, look, nobody knows anything in this town because nobody really knows what will work. And I think the best marketers will also accept that they don't know what works until they test it. Now, there's a lot of logic and there's a lot of process and there's a lot of rational thinking that will inevitably, if I know procurement as a discipline, that will go into this process to define and make real the practice of supplier marketing. And I suppose into that, I would just throw that element of you don't know what you don't know. In what you don't know might be something that unlocks a different way for you to deal with suppliers, a way for you, and this is the marketer in me, a way for you to actually make yourself distinctive ahead of the rest of them. And at the risk of sounding like that old tale with the two guys in front of the line where one of them puts his shoes on and says, I don't need to outrun the line, I just need to outrun you. I'm not trying to be that cynical here, but nevertheless, I can't help myself. You have to have that test and learn methodology as well. Because if you can open up what the barriers are as well as what the problems are, and you can fix what the things are that are actually stopping people even engaging with you, as opposed to doing it begrudgingly or unhappily, then it's a real unlock for value for you as a buyer. And in the end, I suppose if anyone's attending this webinar, they're trying to work out how they could be more attractive, more productive, and nearer to the end point as a buyer by adopting supplier marketing. So that's that extra element I think a marketer would bring.
Well, why don't I ask you the tough question, or easy probably for you, Nathan? How are we going today? I mean, how would you think procurement is really performing when it comes to marketing to suppliers?
Look, from our perspective, here in Trinity P3, it's the curate's egg. It's good in parts. All right. So there are organisations that are understanding this and are working very hard to make this better, and there are others that just don't give a damn and are just going, well, it's not my problem, Jack, because I've just outsourced it with all this tech, and sorry, I've got enough on my plate. And you can completely understand both. The only thing I'd say is that in the marketing world, and certainly in the agency world where we live and spend a lot of our time, the agencies are just running around trying to get business anyway, and you could treat them appallingly and it wouldn't matter. So there you go. That's humans again for you. You can create the best things, and sometimes people just won't play. This is why we can't always have nice things.
Well, having said that, though, from what you've seen, what marketing skills do you think procurement needs to learn most?
So I'd go back to those things around applying the customer lens. I'd go back to making sure that you're not just chasing difference, but also differentiation. I'd look to the biases and the unconscious behaviours that you can address that are actually more powerful often than the conscious ones and the explained ones and the rational ones. And I'd say test and learn, and assume that there are things that you don't know, and see what you can do.
I love it. I love it. Fantastic. Thank you, Nathan, for all those great insights. So practical. Look, as we wrap up today's conversation, I think it's important that we talk about the benefits. So we've talked a lot about the issues around supply marketing, but Anthony, what are some of the wider benefits people can expect to see by taking a more strategic approach to supply marketing, or even just getting started with supply marketing?
Yeah, no, again, one of my sub-themes today is avoid the fluff, right? We do need to make this practical and real for companies, otherwise it's irrelevant. And I think in 4 areas. So firstly, one I've sort of touched on already is there's just an efficiency. There's a reality now that your relationship with your suppliers is not just transactional anymore. I want to buy 100, you deliver 100, you invoice me, I pay you, that's it. It's so much more complicated than that. And even down to your smaller suppliers. Eloise, you mentioned earlier, Eloise Epstein, she has highlighted the fact that your suppliers represent both the biggest source of potential innovation, but also the biggest source of potential risk. And that applies right down to some of your smallest, what you would traditionally consider to be long tail suppliers. So that relationship has changed. It's now much more than just transactional. It's also about sharing information. And that will have an efficiency impact on your business, whether you like it or not. And so by adopting a supplier marketing approach, and I hope we've got a sense today from what that means in terms of using technology, putting yourself in the supplier's shoes, using some of the techniques that marketers use, you can gather that information in a much more efficient way. So one area is honestly just efficiency about dealing with this stuff. The second sort of related point is what you might summarize in 2 words as fill rate. In other words, you need to gather this information from 87 suppliers, and you need all 87 to do it. Now, if you're very targeted and very careful about engaging with those 87, and those 87 not also spammed essentially by other parts of your organization asking for different stuff, then the chances are they will complete that piece of information, because suppliers want to help you. There's not like there's a natural resistance here. There is a natural willingness to engage. You're their customer still. That relationship is still true. But if you're targeted about, this is the one I really need you to complete, don't worry about the other implicitly, don't worry about the other noise. And then don't bother everybody else, then your fill rates will go up. And in marketing, we think of that, for example, in advertising, just real quick. If I'm advertising to get people to, read a piece of content, and it's specifically related to procurement, on LinkedIn, I target people who work in procurement, because then I'm going to get a much better conversion rate. In other words, every dollar I spend on advertising, I'm going to get a better outcome. If I just advertise to everybody in LinkedIn, people who worked in, banks or in whatever, any type of job, the conversion rate would be terrible, because I've gone too broad and I'm not specific. Exactly the same thing applies. Be focused, be targeted, and the fill rate, the number of people who take the action you want them to, will go up. So that's the second. The third thing is sort of an extension of this is, let's think about that new tooling. You're investing all this money in this great technology to make your lives as a buying organization much more efficient. Let's say it's, invoice visibility or some supplier ticketing. Your supplier have questions for you. They have information requests. You don't really want to take that as a phone call. It's quite expensive. So you come up with a new sort of invoice visibility portal or a supplier ticketing system. If none of your suppliers use it, it's a waste of money. You still have to have the help desk, and it's pain and cost that you don't need. If you think about how do I get suppliers to adopt that new tool, what would a marketer do to get customers to take action, to engage, to adopt? You get a better return on investment. More of your suppliers are going to engage. And then real quick, the fourth and final one is, and we've touched on it a few times, is becoming customer of choice. If you are easier to do business with, if it is more efficient, if there's a lot less friction in the relationship, particularly on the mundane side of things that nobody wants to do, but we all have to get done, then your suppliers are going to be much more willing to work with you. And we think that then comes together. And actually, we did a survey middle of last year, which proves the point. If you can achieve customer of choice status with your suppliers, they will go, and they said this in the survey, they will go the extra mile. They are more likely to give you better price. They are more likely to share innovation with you. They are more likely to supply you in times of constraint. And we've had times of constraint in the last few years for one reason or another. If you're customer of choice, you're more likely to be front of the queue. So all of this comes together with, think of your suppliers as organizations which have choice, influence that choice, make yourself easier to work with, and that will then translate to you becoming customer of choice. And we think that will translate then to very tangible benefits for you as an organization.
Well, and Anthony, as today's host and sponsor, I have to ask you the question, how will the HICX platform help with all of this?
Oh, that's very kind, Tania. I'll take the opportunity. Thanks. Yeah, so very, very quickly, two areas. So HICX provides a supplier portal. So for a lot of the very large organizations and a few that I mentioned at the very start here, we are the single portal for all suppliers to access all of the systems in the back office or that are supplier facing. And this actually fixes a very simple, ostensibly simple, but technically challenging problem, which is, as a supplier, I have to remember all these logins. I have to remember all the different systems. I have to remember whether to get my invoice status, I go to system A or system B. I don't want to have to remember that. So a single place where all of the information I need, all of the systems I need to access are not just present, but curated, and curated for me is super important. And so HICX provides a supplier portal where, as a supplier, I get all the information I need and only the information I need, access to all the systems I need and only the systems I need. And it makes my life a lot easier. And the second big thing we do is we provide the single source of truth for supplier data for the organizations we work with. So one of the common challenges is I've got multiple ERP systems, maybe through acquisition or different divisions, and a single supplier can be represented multiple times, or there can be gaps, or there can be duplicates or errors or what have you. And so what we provide is a single source of truth for all supplier data that then feeds all of the other applications that need it, ERP, procurement applications, and other related systems, which is a significant challenge, but it is absolutely solvable, and we do that for our customers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Anthony, and thank you for helping define supplier marketing and unpacking it for us. So thank you.
Pleasure. It's been terrific and a real pleasure to discuss with Nathan as well. So it sounds like we're boringly aligned on this topic, but it's a good conversation.
Well, Nathan, I wanted to thank you because, you gave such great practical and human recommendations to everyone on how they can market themselves better to suppliers. So thank you, Nathan.
Absolute pleasure. I only wish I'd been able to disagree more with Anthony, but I didn't find the opportunity to do it. Anyway, maybe another day, Anthony. Maybe we'll argue about something one day.
Perfect.
I love the violent agreement. And as I said in our last webcast, relationships are and will continue to be the core skill you need to be successful in your roles. Why? Because people buy from people, not companies. Procurement really is a relationship business. And even into the future, when we have our chatbots, AI, and every other digital tool imaginable, we'll still be in the center of it all, making the critical final decisions and using our humanness to make judgments and influence others and keep our businesses on track. So I think you'll agree, I hope you'll agree, that our experts today provided a fantastic overview of how we can improve our supplier experience. So if you'd like to listen to this webcast again or share it with your peers, we'll be making the on-demand available on Procurious from tomorrow. So thank you for taking the time to listen, and I'll see you soon.